Let's go like this with dopamine. Reward-based learning. That's it. Now, you take that single phrase and you break it down, and when reward-based learning goes badly, you can have addiction. When you're not learning because you're not getting the signals you need, you can have amotivational states. Parkinson's and some other conditions happen, schizophrenia, associated with dopamine not doing exactly what it needs to be doing. ADHD, just about anything that would rely on higher order functioning is affected by dopamine. And in your body, and this is just side stuff, it's related to blood pressure management as well. And vasodilation, yeah. But you want to focus on reward-based learning.
Okay, now, you know what? I feel like I need to rein us both back in, because since we've been talking about doing this, we're a little bit ahead of maybe the rest of the crowd. Let's get back to what make neuromodulator.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want to assume that everyone even is familiar with that word. Neuromodulators do what, Manny?
I like to think of it as a warm, happy soup of you. So your mood, your perception of the environment, how you feel things are going, how quickly you respond, your growth processes all are related to a combination of electrochemical, electromagnetic events. The neuromodulators, by changing sort of the soup at various parts, change the way in which your synapses fire, or might interfere such that it takes either more firing, less firing. Yeah, that's the best way to think about it. They change what's called activation thresholds, like how quickly you are to fire and say, boom, this was a reward. Boom, this is a fight-flight situation.
So dopamine is physically present in the body, and it's moving between the neurons. It's traveling across the synapse.
Yep.
And I had heard once, tell me if this is I know this probably isn't like the most technical thing, but I've heard it described once as that neuromodulators are sort of like keys and keyholes that they sort of like have a place that they go, right? Like they connect, they work.
Yeah, they have like receptors.
Yeah, okay.
On the synaptic end, yeah.
And so, go ahead.
What's key to keep in mind also is that there are D1, D2, D3, D4. There's various dopamine receptors, so it's important to kind of look at the category as something that has branching depth under there, but just that's so when you hear contrasting things, you're not like, well, that wasn't covered. There's more to it, but sometimes you just got to grab the big picture, the initial model, so you can kind of conceptually think about the thing.
So there are like multiple versions of dopamine?
There are multiple dopamine receptors.
Okay.
That respond differently.
Okay.
In different contexts.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And so to go back to like, let's try to connect just a little bit to like last week's stuff. Yeah. So I have what part that we talked about last week would be about learning, reward-based learning?
I'd say basal ganglia, which we didn't talk about last week.
Which we didn't cover, actually. Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And ventral striatum, that's basal ganglia still. Prefrontal cortex would be affected by it.
That's what I was wondering about
dorsolateral prefrontal cortex.
Because this is what we talked about last week, is they all kind of, a lot of them work together, right? So
yeah, they work together to represent a situation.
Cingulate cortex, if I'm in a situation in which
uncertainty, risk.
There's uncertainty, right? And then that creates a learning experience for me. I could be getting involved somehow even, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
And so I have an experience, and I have thoughts, and those thoughts themselves create the release of neuromodulators? Yeah, see, that's what I'm going to start pushing.
Okay. Yeah, when you say thoughts, there's more than one part to a thought. A thought involves a perception.
Yep.
Taking the time to absorb more information to come to an inference, which is when I think of the inference as the ZWAP moment, where you're like, is that a bear or is it not a bear? And based on your level of fear, and as a matter of fact, you know what? I'll give it to you one way better. Okay? Dopamine is involved on an axis where, and you think of it sort of like this, where it calculates at times how much energy you have for the reward-based experience. Now, if you're low energy, you're stressed, you're going to be in what's called exploiting mode. That means instrumental behavior, behavior that gets you, the behavior you know works. Okay. Whereas if you have a little more energy, if you have a little more cognitive reserve, if you're less stressed, you know, higher order brain parts, you're going to be in what's called exploring mode. You have your creativity, you have, with the mice, when they do the mouse experiment, you have the mouse exploring the cage area instead of just beating the life out of the thing that he knows will give food. So it's sort of a habit. I think last week we discussed that, like the level of stress making it that you might go into a habit mode when your amygdala goes. Right. So yeah, so amygdala might be related as well. Like everything is within a system. It just depends on how far along a particular circuit you want to go. Right. So you know, again, last week we talked about parts, and so it's not as if dopamine is only hanging out in one chunk of the brain. It's going to a lot of different places, and depending on what receptors it connects to, it's doing different things, right? Yep. Yep. Now, I think we have a good image that shows sort of a dopamine flow. Okay, I can pull that up right now. Awesome signals. That's a good code name for dopamine. Awesome signals. But I won't force it. I won't force it. Okay, so pathways. Yeah. Give me a basic understanding of why we're using the word pathways. The best way to think of it is the way your brain conveys information is by two parts resonating. They're both vibrating at the same frequency, like pulses and I'm thinking basal firing and phasic, tonic and phasic, but I can't really think of a good way to explain the two. So I'll just go more general. I'm like, okay, they don't want neurochemistry right now. That's geekerific. A pathway is there tends to be nerves that bundle together, and sometimes, often in habits, they get myelinated, which is like white matter around them. Right. Now, those myelinated bundles of nerves end up creating highways, like superhighways. The myelinated ones are like 10,000 times faster, so they create cognitive habits. Now, some of them all of us have, and some examples would be the ventral tegmental area, the VTA, nucleus accumbens. The striatum is part of your basal ganglia. Yeah. So. Okay. So these blue pathways are places that have developed that dopamine likes to travel along to because it goes to parts of your brain that do things that you need dopamine to do? Yeah. Yeah. Well, you need dopamine to do, but the signaling along that pathway is dopamine dependent. Okay. Okay. And substantia nigra up there is sort of the site of creation of your dopamine. Okay. Yeah. Cool. So and then on the left, lower left, it says functions for dopamine: reward, pleasure, motor function. Yeah. Compulsion, perseveration. Yeah, compulsion and perseveration. Those are your addiction mechanisms. And remember, we said the exploitation behavior, where if you stress someone enough, they're gonna basically hyperuse a drug. Now, where the exploration mechanism, the way that works is that you need to be stressed enough to be motivated, but unstressed enough to tend towards creative problem solving. If you're too stressed to make any type of cognitive flexibility, you will continue to do what's called sign tracking instead of goal tracking, and that leads to addiction, where you're still doing the thing despite the fact that it's not giving you the reward, because you've associated the reward with the thing. Like when you're gambling and you're losing and you get a rush still from, like, as if you're winning, meanwhile your house is gone. Yeah. And in Parkinson's, this happens when they treat patients with levodopa. I'm hoping I'm remembering that right. Yeah, levodopa. I haven't treated old folks in a while. No offense to old folks out there. But yeah, when what they were finding when they were treating the Parkinson's patients, they were going off and gambling a bunch of their fixed income because suddenly they perceived patterns and became perseverative and compulsive. So that's the mechanism of addiction.
All right.
So reward-based learning. Now, the functions they listed there are going wrong and examples, but a lot of times when you want to repeat one piece to yourself so that you can retrieve the other associated memories, reward-based learning, dopamine, reward-based learning.